1995. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. While the peak era of action movies was beginning to wane, multiplexes were still packed with decent enough action films, and icons like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone were still packing them in, while second-tier action heroes like Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme were still trying to punch their way onto the A-list.
Welcome to hell!
It would never quite happen for those two, with both starring in direct-to-video movies by the end of the decade. But 1995, also arguably, was the last year in the 90s when Stallone and Schwarzenegger were at the very top of their game. Schwarzenegger's career would only really falter towards the end of the decade, and he was not really able to recapture his former box office glory following his run as the governor of California in the mid-2000s. But even before then, his box office had slipped, and in fact, in 1996, his film Eraser would surprise a lot of people by only grossing $100 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but for Schwarzenegger, not really.
I'll be back. You've been back enough.
Stallone would be luckier in the 2000s, as he was able to reinvent himself by resurrecting his two most popular characters, Rocky and Rambo, in 2006 and 2008.
It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
But 1995 would mark the beginning of a very bad stretch for Sylvester Stallone, to the point that for a while, some of his movies, such as ICU and Avenging Angelo, started going straight to video. What exactly happened? Well, there were a lot of reasons, but one had to be the shift in the kind of action movies that were being made. Stallone and Schwarzenegger's muscled breed of action heroes were gradually being replaced by more down-to-earth heroes, such as the ones played by Nicolas Cage in his run of Jerry Bruckheimer movies.
I drive a Volvo, beige one.
But there was another kind of hero on the rise: superheroes. If you can't fight him, join him. And that must have been what was on Stallone's mind when he signed on to star in Judge Dredd.
Court's adjourned.
In 1995, the era of superheroes hadn't yet hit its peak, but Hollywood was starting to take notice. Batman had been a major hit in 1989, and so had its sequels. And in fact, the third film, Batman Forever, would beat Judge Dredd to theaters early in the summer of 1995.
It's the car, right? Chicks love the car.
What's interesting is how Hollywood at the time was never able to come to terms with DC or Marvel for more major films based on major characters. And when superhero movies were made outside of the Batman series, they would tend to be based on pulp properties like The Shadow or The Phantom, both of which were turned into pretty pricey flops. Judge Dredd, of course, would be based on the British comic series 2000 AD. The character was a major success, and soon the idea was hatched to turn the series into a major film. After all, RoboCop, a character not dissimilar from Judge Dredd, became a major franchise for Orion.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
However, no Hollywood star was going to do what they should have done to be faithful to the comics, mainly wear a helmet all the way through the film. Heck, even in the RoboCop movies, Peter Weller gets to be out of the helmet for long stretches of time. When Stallone signed on to play the role, not only was Dredd's time in the helmet going to be cut down, but in fact, after the opening action sequence, he barely wears it. The premise of the film, oddly, would be almost identical to Stallone's earlier hit, Tango and Cash, where Judge Dredd would be accused of a crime he didn't commit and sent to jail.
I'm so sorry. I let you down.
This time, instead of spending any time locked up, Dredd escapes and spends most of the film roaming the cursed Earth wasteland surrounding his home, Mega City 1. The antagonist would be right out of the comics, and his relationship with Dredd is about the only thing the movie carried over. Both Dredd and his brother Rico are clones, but when Dredd dedicates his life to the law, Rico becomes bad and is sent to prison, escaping years later to wreak havoc. Now, Judge Dredd is widely considered one of Stallone's worst movies. Sly himself dismisses it in interviews, and its director, Danny Cannon, was so miserable making the film, he swore to never again work with a major star, and indeed, he has had a widely successful career on TV, serving as an EP for the CSI franchise, even directing the pilot of the original show. He didn't really go back to movies after this, which is too bad because his career had a pretty promising start with The Young Americans. He was simply not a happy camper on set, and the script by action veterans Stephen E. D'Souza and William Musher Jr., the writers of Die Hard and Terminator 2, makes the movie come off like a poor imitation of Demolition Man. Unlike that film, the satire, which is shoehorned in, has no bite, and the movie becomes utterly reliant on Rob Schneider as Fergie, Dredd's comic relief sidekick.
Mr. I am the law.
Schneider, of course, was also in Demolition Man, but in a much smaller role. The supporting cast here is good, really good actually, but they're largely wasted, with it seeming like the film was reworked into a buddy comedy at the last moment, with Fergie originally getting killed in the first cut of the film, only to be given a reprieve in reshoots.
I'm alive! I'm alive!
Diane Lane plays Dredd's protege and love interest, Judge Hershey, but should Judge Dredd have a love interest? Doesn't really make sense, right? And she does get very little to do, although she does get a great one-liner during her fight with Joan Chen.
Bitch! Judge, bitch!
Max von Sydow plays Dredd's mentor, who exists only really to die in the second act, while Jurgen Prochnow is the secondary baddie. What makes Judge Dredd kinda worth watching, though, is the guy they got to play Dredd's evil brother, Rico, Armand Assante. Him and Sly had worked together well before on Paradise Alley, and at the time his career was doing pretty well, with him coming off the Mambo Kings and a few other solid roles. As Rico, he's doing a full-on Stallone impersonation.
He looks a lot like you.
He's a lot like me. And nothing like you.
And watching him do evil Sly is actually a lot of fun.
You betray the law!
He arguably saves the movie, as Sly's performance is all over the place. He's trying to play Dredd as kind of a quasi-spoof, but at times his own performance contradicts with the movie, as he plays too many scenes with real pathos. It makes the film come off as a bit schizophrenic, whereas Armand Assante is just playing the camp up to the hilt.
You let me judge my own brother?
Stallone also looks really strange in this movie, wearing blue contact lenses. He famously does not have blue eyes, so it's kind of off-putting to see him like this. It's a really weird role for him, and it doesn't look like he's having much fun. The film is really only saved by its jaunty pace, good production design, and those crazy judge uniforms by Gianni Versace. The soundtrack by Alan Silvestri is not bad, but originally it was supposed to be written by Jerry Goldsmith, and in fact he scored the trailer, which has this really interesting march going, but they weren't able to use it for the film, which is too bad because this movie could have used an epic musical score. Might have pushed it a little bit over the limit. The film itself is ragged and episodic, with perhaps the best action beat coming midway through the movie when Dredd and Fergie run afoul of some cannibals. Apparently, the film was recut at the 11th hour to get an R rating, and for a while, Hollywood Pictures, the subsidiary of Disney that was producing the film, even tried to cut it to a PG-13 to go after the Batman crowd. One could see why they might have done this, as the box office for Judge Dredd was nothing short of a disaster. It was an expensive tentpole movie with a budget in the $85 million range, and it only grossed $34.7 million domestically, which was nightmarish. It did fairly well overseas, but it seriously dented Stallone's reputation as a box office draw, and it would be the first of 3 pricey flops that, for a time, put his career in real jeopardy.
The law doesn't make mistakes.
Really? Then how do you explain what happened to you?
In hindsight, Stallone has always said that the movie went wrong in trying to be too serious. Many actually claimed the film was too jokey as it was, but to Stallone, it should have been even more satirical. Whatever the case, a more faithful adaptation of the property was done by Alex Garland and starred Karl Urban, and it got great reviews, but was also a box office flop. So perhaps there's just something about the character that leaves the mainstream audience cold. Judge Dredd ranks as one of Stallone's worst action movies of the 90s, but like a few others in the series, it kind of semi-works as a time capsule thanks to the over-the-top sets, costumes, and the really interesting Britpop soundtrack that includes music from people like The Cure, The, Left Field, and more. It's not especially good, but I'd still say it's watchable, so I give it about a 6 out of 10.
I'll be the judge of that.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. go get you some.
I am the law.
It's a crime when a kick-ass reboot suffers from the dismal reputation of its predecessor. In the case of the 2012 movie, Dredd, it was a daring attempt to separate itself from the infamous 1995 Sylvester Stallone vehicle and return the lethal lawman to his grim, ultra-violent comic book source material. But it did not go as planned in terms of audience reception or financial success. The R-rated release was a massive box office disappointment. But in the decade since it received the death sentence at theaters, the visceral action movie found an enthusiastic following and became a cult classic, building interest and fueling hope that the character could return in a sequel or streaming series. Besides flopping at the box office, Dredd also went through a lengthy and turbulent production that ultimately called into question who exactly even directed the movie. Well, Dredd himself, actor Karl Urban, exclusively gave us that answer. Keep your helmet on and find out what the fuck happened to this movie. The character of Judge Dredd first appeared in 1977 in the British comic series 2000 AD. Set in a post-apocalyptic future, the stories of Dredd take place in and around the sprawling Mega City 1, a crime-ridden metropolis where street cops called judges dispense swift and usually extremely violent justice. Dredd was, of course, previously adapted into the notorious 1995 Stallone headliner, a glossy and expensive production that successfully translated the overcrowded high-tech Mega City 1, but got almost nothing right about Dredd himself. Fans of the character's comic exploits were not pleased. One of those fans was 28 Days Later's screenwriter Alex Garland, who wanted to make a more comic-accurate version of Dredd, and began working on drafts back in 2006 while still writing Danny Boyle's underappreciated sci-fi movie, Sunshine. Garland ended up writing over a dozen drafts of Dredd, with early iterations tackling Dredd's rivalry with Judge Death and the supernatural Dark Judges. But Garland deemed that storyline too ambitious and admitted he couldn't quite crack the mythology required for a satisfying movie, especially since the judge system hadn't been properly explained and it would all require too much comic knowledge for average audiences. Garland also tried adapting the Cursed Earth story arc from the comics, but again found it too broad in scope. After considering the Origins and Democracy comic storylines, he decided to focus on a tighter day-in-the-life story along the lines of Training Day meets Die Hard, which Dredd comic co-creator John Wagner supported, claiming the expansive sweep of the 1995 film was one of its glaring missteps. In Garland's final version of the story, Dredd is tasked with assessing Anderson, a rookie judge with mutant telepathic powers. The pair responds to a grisly triple homicide call at a skyscraper slum called Peach Trees, where ruthless criminal Ma produces a drug called Slow-Mo, which makes humans perceive time at 1% normal speed. Trapped in the high-rise, the two judges have to fight their way through hordes of Ma's gun-toting henchmen, along with some crooked fellow cops. According to Garland, it was important to restore the comic characterization of Dredd as a hardline lawman who doesn't evolve much, unlike the 1995 movie's clunky attempts to humanize the character. As Garland said, "I didn't think Dredd could have a great epiphany, but there is definitely a change in him over the course of the movie. He makes a very clear statement at the beginning of the film, which he then contradicts at the end. That's about as far as the shift goes." Garland instead deliberately chose to give most of the character growth to Anderson as a way to counter Dredd's rigidity. He also admitted to naming the movie's primary location Peach Trees, also the script's working title, after a restaurant in Shrewsbury, England called The Peach Tree, where he met Dredd co-creator John Wagner for the first time to discuss the project. With the script finally in decent shape, development on Dredd began in December 2008. DNA Films partnered with IM Global and Reliance Big Pictures, and by early 2010 they had raised $45 million. Trying to cash in on the premium price 3D trend after the gargantuan success of Avatar, the companies chose to make a 3D version of the movie. With production slated to take place in Cape Town, South Africa in late 2010, the search began for a director. At first, Moon director Duncan Jones was courted, but despite enjoying Garland's script, he declined due to having a much different vision for the character. Jones claimed his ideas were weirder, darker, and funnier than Garland's lean, mean, streamlined approach. After Jones passed, Vantage Point director Pete Travis was hired. Although Michael Biehn had auditioned for the lead role, Dredd would ultimately be played by another reliable genre regular, Karl Urban. The actor, a longtime fan of the comic, underwent extensive physical training to portray what he called a beast of a man. Urban reportedly also took a method approach, retaining the character's grimace, raspy voice, and helmet while on set, creating such an intense vibe that crew members were deathly afraid of even looking at the constantly scowling actor. Urban also performed many of his own stunts, including driving the Lawmaster motorcycle, taking full ownership of the role like a true badass. For adapting that Lawmaster bike from the comics, the preposterously oversized tires were ditched in favor of a heavily modified but fully functional 500cc motorcycle. Dredd's signature Lawgiver sidearm was a real operational firearm, built up from a Glock 17 9mm, complete with automatic and semi-auto firing options, and some obviously futuristic modifications. When Olivia Thirlby was cast as Anderson, she also went through weapons and martial arts training, and said her look and attitude were partly inspired by Blondie's singer Debbie Harry. Thirlby noted that the character was meant to be morally murky, in contrast to Dredd's clear-cut black-and-white law officer, saying Anderson operates in a gray area where everything is enhanced or clouded by the fact that she knows what is going on in the very interior of a person. Despite her busy schedule on Game of Thrones, Lena Headey pursued the role of chilling villain Ma-Ma, who was initially written as older and was intended to be one of the comic's morbidly obese fatties. She was given free rein to interpret the character, getting a rare chance to show some of her actual tattoos and drawing inspiration from punk rock legend Patti Smith. In Headey's words, "I think of Ma-Ma like an old great white shark who is just waiting for someone bigger and stronger to show up and kill her. She's ready for it. In fact, she can't wait for it to happen. She's an addict, so she's dead in that way, but that last knock just hasn't come." For the visual design of the world and lead character, further efforts were made to distance Dredd from the cartoonish 1995 Stallone affair. The decision was made to have a sleeker lawman, more like a lightweight boxer than a beefy Rambo-style judge. The trademark costume from the comic was altered in favor of more realistic tactical armor. As Garland said, if you did a very faithful adaptation of the uniform, you'd have someone who, if he got stabbed in the stomach, he'd be in big trouble. Dredd is out there on the front line, so he needed protection. One aspect of Dredd's iconic costume retained from the comics was his eyes shrouded by a police helmet, which is never removed in the film, unlike Stallone, who ditched it entirely after just 15 minutes of screen time. According to Urban, the cryptic identity is meant to thematically reinforce Dredd as, quote, the faceless representative of the law. That is part of his enigma. You wouldn't get to the end of a Sergio Leone western and say, God, I didn't even know the character's name. It's irrelevant. Long before a director was even hired for Dredd, Garland was already working with art director Neil Miller and head of visual effects John Thune on how to visually represent Mega City 1 and the hallucinogenic effects of the slow-mo drug. After experimenting with numerous methods and techniques, including real bullets, blood bags, and various prosthetics, the slow-mo impact effect was achieved by shooting compressed air to create the appearance of rippling skin when a perp is hit by a bullet or blast. Oddly enough, the sound when people ingest the narcotic was inspired by Garland hearing a Justin Bieber song, slowed to 1/800th its normal speed. The drug's kaleidoscopic rainbow effect was influenced by nature documentaries that incorporated high-speed filming methods to capture animals moving in slow motion. Marrying the trippy imagery with hardcore violence to create a whole new aesthetic, Garland wanted to see if he could create something he called so abstract that it becomes genuinely beautiful, even if it's someone having their cheek blown out or their head crushing into concrete. Garland would push that mind-scrambling style to even further limits in his 2018 film, Annihilation. Dredd officially began shooting in Cape Town, South Africa in December 2010 with a budget that would eventually grow to $50 million. The film was shot digitally with a new Phantom Flex high-speed camera used for the slow-mo sequences, which were shot at 4,000 frames per second. While much of the movie was filmed in 3D, many 2D sequences were converted in post-production. When Oscar-winning Slumdog Millionaire cinematographer Anthony Dodd Mantle was hired, he and Garland immediately set out to create a gritty, realistic world with thrilling action sequences, and began gravitating toward gangster crime movies for ideas. Dodd Mantle also hoped to evoke a painterly quality, similar to such futuristic sci-fi thrillers as Blade Runner and A Clockwork Orange. He had never worked with 3D before, but rejected the rules of the format and the limitations of the bulky equipment, and instead helped develop a brand new handheld 3D camera that could capture extreme 3D close-ups of actors. To retain a grounded aesthetic and a heightened extension of modern architecture, many of the Mega City 1 shots were actual footage of Cape Town and Johannesburg, digitally enhanced in post-production. Partial interiors and exteriors of the brutalist structures were created on a backlot and expanded with visual effects. For the massive Peach Tree's atrium, a real Cape Town location was used and seamlessly integrated with CGI and several other physical sets. By now, you might be wondering where director Pete Travis was during all of this. Well, in October of 2011, the LA Times reported that Travis had been barred from the editing process over reports of irreconcilable differences and unsatisfactory footage, leaving the major decision-making and reshoots to writer and producer Alex Garland. That report prompted an unusual bit of damage control from the production in the form of a joint statement from Garland and Travis, which claimed, "During all stages of the production, Dredd has been a collaboration between a number of dedicated creative parties. From the outset, we decided on an unorthodox collaboration to make the film." However, Karl Urban wasn't quite so interested in diplomacy or PR spin. In an exclusive interview with JoBlo.com, Urban bluntly said, quote, "What a lot of people don't realize is that Alex Garland actually directed that movie. I just hope when people think of Alex Garland's filmography that Dredd is the first film that he made before Ex Machina."
Judgment time.
Seems like the judge passed the final verdict on that. Okay, so even beyond the behind-the-scenes drama, why the hell did Dredd fare so poorly when it opened in North America on September 21st, 2012? Many suggest that it suffered from the lingering toxic reputation of Stallone's Judge Dredd. Perhaps it was the lack of major stars, or a fall release date rather than summertime, where comic adaptations tended to reach wider audiences. Maybe moviegoers had grown tired of the higher-priced novelty of the 3D trend. Whatever the case, despite strong early reactions from Comic-Con and festival screenings, and a mostly positive critical response, Dredd opened in 6th place for its first weekend, with just $6.2 million, even less than the anticipated $8 to $10 million. The movie completely disappeared from the top 10 the following week, and finished its box office run with a miserable $13.4 million domestic and $41 million worldwide. Before the movie was released, Garland had ideas for a trilogy, and stated that grossing $50 million in America alone would ensure future sequels, likely never imagining that Dredd would fail to even reach that figure globally. In the view of Karl Urban, Dredd's doom was at least partly due to mishandled marketing, even though Lionsgate reportedly invested $25 million in its advertising campaign, including a satirical Dredd Report website and a tie-in Ma motion comic. Urban claimed that the film had zero audience awareness, proclaiming, quote, "Dredd represents a failure in marketing, not filmmaking." There was also Gareth Edwards' movie, The Raid, which not only bears a similar plot, setting, and intense level of violence, but also earned better reviews when it was released on US screens several months before Dredd's theatrical debut. Even worse, The Raid hit home video just weeks before Urban blasted his way through Peachtree's block. While the origins and timelines of the two productions obviously made plagiarism impossible, some still felt The Raid made Dredd feel derivative or superfluous. But like so many movies that were unjustly ignored at the box office, Dredd went on to become a beloved cult classic thanks to huge success on home video. While all of the filmmaker's technical efforts to do something unique with the 3D format largely went unseen on the big screen, the movie itself found a faithful fan base that continues to clamor for some kind of sequel. Alex Garland has publicly expressed doubt that he would return, but Karl Urban has been vocal over the years about the prospect of wearing the helmet once again, expressing interest in playing the character for the proposed series Judge Dredd Mega City 1. While it remains to be seen if a live-action Dredd ever viciously dispenses justice again on the big or small screen, at the very least, we got a satisfying action-packed adaptation of the classic comic character and the grim future he inhabits. Let us know your thoughts. Leave a comment in the comments, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.